Hey folks, Jem here. I'm taking a couple of weeks off on baby leave with a new child. So it's not actually that I don't have time for the podcast at the moment. It's more that I'm desperately trying to get as much sleep as possible in amongst the chaos of 3 children. Hoping to be back co-hosting with Justin on Parts Department again in a few weeks' time. But in the meantime, Justin has just done an episode with Dylan of Proteum Machining on his podcast, Within Tolerance, which is an excellent podcast that I've been listening to for many years. So it was awesome to hear Justin interviewed on it the other day. It's a really good episode. It's a nice long one, lots of juicy details. And despite having recorded over 100 episodes with Justin at this point, I still learnt a whole bunch of things. I hope you enjoy the episode. This will be our fill-in this week. Go and follow the Within Tolerance podcast and check out Dylan and his work at Proteum Machining. And I hope you're all well. Chat to you soon.
You are listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Proteum Machining, and this week I'm very happy to welcome Justin Breuliet from PDX CNC. How's it going, Justin?
Hey, Dylan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah. It's been, a little bit of an interesting week or so. I got sick for the first time, so my voice is a little different. My son got sick. He's 6 months old, so Dylan kindly rescheduled, but if you know my voice, it's a little weird today.
Yeah. Well, why don't you let everybody know, if they don't know who you are and what you do, what is PDX CNC, and also what is your podcast where they might have heard your voice?
Sure. So Portland CNC was kind of or PDX CNC, which I just use because it's easier on social media, basically. It's shorter. It's a CNC router job shop that I started kind of on a whim back 2017 when I was designing furniture and couldn't get anybody to build my furniture or machine my furniture. And I had some experience with routers in design school, and everybody just kept looking at me like I was crazy. So I eventually got frustrated to the point where I bought a CNC router and put it in my garage and needed to pay for that router. And so, like anybody, I suppose, or maybe like me, I looked up and I was like, oh, well, I could maybe start a side business. And nobody had the name Portland CNC as a state in the state of Oregon. And,
which is wild, by the way.
Right.
What a score.
I know. And I was like, well, this is just what people Google to get the thing they want. So this ought to work out. And I really never thought it would be much of anything. I just thought, this $800 payment I have to make needs to be made somehow. And immediately people were wanting weird stuff made on a router, which was kind of my pitch, I guess, was we don't just do cabinets, and kind of took off from there, I guess.
Awesome. And then what's your podcast? Go ahead and plug it.
The podcast. My friend Jem and I, Jem is an Australian gentleman of the same kind of flavor of CNC router. Will make kind of anything for you. Is kind of how we both started into that. And I found him on Instagram, I think, at one point. And I was like, hey, this guy's like, I feel like he's me, but just Australian. And let's see if this is interesting. And I reached out. And so we just hit our 100th episode of what we call Parts Department, which Dylan is kindly a listener of.
Oh, yeah.
We go back and forth about our podcasts. His is a little more notable, but it's fun. It's good therapy.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. And for everybody listening, if you don't recognize Jem's name, they're like butter on Instagram. Good. And most notably have their pencil sharpener, which is just a like wild home built, but not really home built CNC lathe cutoff crazy thing.
Vertical lathe.
Yeah.
Vertical lathe with a cutoff skill saw and like 3 or 4 trim routers that act as thread mills. And you can basically automatically thread mill like 50 mil dowel, maybe larger, 70 mil dowel. It's an amazing machine. I want one.
Yeah, it's super cool. But awesome. Well, let's jump back then. How did you get into this? You said you're at design school. So what did you go to school for? How did you get into manufacturing, all that stuff?
Right. I mean, I suppose like a lot of your guests that I hear, I love to make stuff, right? Like, always was stealing into the garage and building something out of the wood in the corner that I wasn't supposed to be building when I was a kid. And so I ended up going to architecture school in Nebraska. Didn't really know what I was going in for. I think I thought I was going to build houses and design houses, and that's really not at all. It's mostly art, and I was not really that into art at first, but came to kind of enjoy and appreciate that. So in architecture school, there was a CNC router. I think it was like a 1980s Precix, and it had two sides. I think it ran on a DOS program that you'd have to like shift over from the Windows side into. Just an absolute pile of crap. Nobody knew how to run it, but I just like fell in love with that. I could make things. I was always pretty good at computer modeling and design in the computer paint shop when I was a kid. And yeah, I just fell in love with the idea that I've never been super good at making things with my hands. And it was like, well, this can just make it perfectly, realistically, even though this machine could only cut ovals instead of circles. But it still was fascinating, and that led me into kind of an idea of product design, which spawned a Kickstarter in 2011 with my friend Nick, which started a business while we were in architecture school, which turned into, long down the road, Portland CNC about 8 years later or something like that. So yeah, so that's my manufacturing background, I guess.
Were you born in Nebraska?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was like, that seems like a weird choice to go otherwise.
No, I am a Nebraskan from birth till about 20. And my wife and I moved both from architecture school to Seattle.
Okay.
To get out of the Midwest and to take some different jobs. And she had family up here. So we fell in love with it up here.
More sense. Yeah. I was like, man, if you were born in Portland and went to Nebraska for architecture, you were going to have to explain that story.
No, that'd be weird. Yeah, you paid out-of-state tuition to go to Nebraska? No.
Right.
Lovely people, not a place I really would want to visit for very long.
Okay. What was the Kickstarter that you guys did?
We had a, back in school again, it was like 2010, let's say, laptops that we used to do renderings for of our buildings and stuff would just get crazy hot. And so my friend laser cut a laptop stand out of, I think it was basswood, which is what you use to model. It's a weird type of, I guess it's somewhat similar to like maple, but it's very specific for modeling buildings and such. And everybody loved it in our school because it kept your computer a little bit cooler. It raised it up. Things were very simple back then, and computers could literally melt things underneath them because they would get so hot. It's just kind of ridiculous. So we ended up doing a Kickstarter to make an injection molded version. So that was also a huge aspect into falling into manufacturing, basically, of I knew how to CAD model things, knew nothing about molds, industrial design, and it took us about 6 months of basically failing and a family friend helping us that had a mold that worked in a mold making shop in Omaha, Nebraska, kind of helped us through making this injection mold that actually functioned at the end to have these two pieces of plastic that intersected, goes under your laptop. We called it the prop. We got a design patent through our university for it. And that kind of like really cemented my like love of digital fabrication or fabrication that could be more than somebody making one-off or one thing, after another by themselves. So some kind of scale to a product was really fascinating to me.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So that was in school. Let's talk on that road from, Kickstarter to PDX CNC, because I think you've mentioned on Parts Department that you were working for Costco for a while.
Yeah. Right. So my first job, I got a bachelor and master's in architecture. It's kind of the norm in our school. It's about 6 years. And that whole time I kind of always knew I'm going to have my own business. It was like, what's that going to look like in the end was the big question. And some of my experiences, we also won a few design competitions of me and my friend Nick, and then a couple other friends for like furniture. It's like, you call it site furniture. So it'd be like a bench you see on a campus or like a bike stand. And we made a series of those that won a competition for a local company that made this stuff that ended up being on like Google campuses, which was kind of interesting. So that was kind of fun and a good, like all that stuff was really fascinating. I loved figuring out how to get it made and like working with the people that would actually make those parts. And let's see. So all of that was kind of leading me towards, in the end, sorry, what was your question? What was where am I going?
Where did you go? Like, how did you get from Nebraska Kickstarter to Portland CNC shop? Like
Sorry, yes.
We kind of glossed over that.
Right.
I know you had mentioned Costco. I think you were an architect for them or something like that.
Yes. Sorry. Trying to answer that. Got kind of long-winded. Fell in love with all those things in the way, but ended up taking a job in an architecture firm in Seattle, Washington, Kirkland, I guess, if you're specific, that was the architect of record, still is, as far as I understand, that does like all of they do all of the architecture for Costco, like across the world. And so basically what that turns out to be is they want to put it in, say, Omaha, Nebraska, or wherever it is, Phoenix, and Phoenix goes, it has to fit our city. And so the architect has to go, well, we really want a warehouse. And we always called it just putting lipstick on a pig, because it's always Costco on the inside, and what the outside looks like of any big box store kind of ends up changing. So I did that for 1 year. And it was a good place, but I just had no interest. I had all this other desire to be doing my own thing. And so I quit just before my first anniversary because I didn't want to have the big corporate, Justin's first year, let's all clap for him. And I was like, I cannot do that and then quit. And so I quit like a week before.
I love it. Yeah. I'm not at all shocked that designing Costco's for the rest of your life didn't spark joy there.
There's a lot of other avenues in architecture, but the business wasn't anything really, and I guess I had some experience. The business of architecture isn't like what design school is. It's kind of fanciful when you're in school, and the design and making is really fun, but then you get into the real world, and Costco's an example where most of what you do is communicate with the city and kind of hash out very finite details that are like, how many bike racks should there be, or like how tall should and it's never really like making or designing in the end. So just wasn't what I was passionate about.
Yeah, I think that happens with a lot of not trades, but professions where there's design involved. Like I know a lot of my friends who are in engineering didn't expect to be designing bolts and doing bolt calculations. Like they're like, oh no, I wanted to make the next cool thing. And it's like,
right.
Well, that's 1% of the job, maybe.
Right. What they always have you do when you start out in architecture, maybe it's changed 10 years ago, and before it was you detail bathrooms. So figure out where the urinals go, and then make drawings and.
Wow. So quite
just
literally
like
a shit job.
Bolts. Yeah. Right.
Wow. All right. So. Then where did you go from there? I'm still missing this connection of like, you said you bought a router, but at what point did that happen?
Following a thread, yeah. All right, so kind of got into the business that I had at the time. Still the same business, just different name. Basically, was called Knack Studio, which was me designing furniture or different kind of home goods, things that I found. I designed a series of calendars that are a different format that came right after the laptop stand, and originally had my friend who had a plotter printing them in his apartment. Ended up getting production help with that, but we'd sold, I don't know, close to 1,000, I think, at our most, and it's slowly dwindled over time. So I still have Knack Studio. That was where I was designing furniture, including like a big desk, which was the impetus for getting a CNC router, because it has a big curved 3D edge to the front, something a little more ergonomic, something a little better to look at. It's just the thing I was passionate about making at the time. Looking back, it wasn't a great product to try to sell on the internet as I thought I could do. That was my experience, was I could sell laptop stands and calendars, and somehow the big shift to let's sell a 30 by 60 desk, just, I don't know, people don't want to shop for, at least at that time, never wanted to shop for a desk as I expected them to. They want to sit at it and try it, I think. So I bought the router because nobody would basically help me machine them in a reasonable amount of money, or we're just scared to try it. So we ended up moving to Portland kind of in the middle of working on all this next phase of my business, I guess, in 2016. And a year later, I bought the router after I had explored all the Portland options for people that thought I was crazy too. And looking back, having done weird projects like desks that are 4 different sheets of plywood and get laminated together and 3D machined, I would probably charge more than I was getting quotes for now to do it. And, I don't regret any of that process, because I think what it taught me was, I think I just saw AJ of, I don't remember his new company, Design with
Audacity Micro.
Audacity. He was saying that ADHD plus, engineering equals being a machinist. And I completely appreciate that. That is me to a T. I don't consider myself an engineer, but, I was always kind of interested in making stuff. And so being able to make weird projects for other people for the last, 7 years now or something like that, it's been really great. And in that process, we stumbled back into making products again, but for CNC routing shops, CNC shops in general. And so it's kind of all come full circle in a weird kind of accidental way.
Yeah. So let's talk about the growth of your shop then, and kind of the life cycle of some of these projects. You mentioned your desk. I know you had a calendar at some point. That was pretty cool, like a powder coated like whiteboard or something like that. Yeah,
that's behind me. So in the process of kind of going from knowing we wanted to move a little bit out of what we call like job shop, I guess, we had job shop CNC router, which people kind of always cock their hat at me when I say that. They're like, what do you mean? What do you do? And I'm like, well, everything but cabinets, basically. And so it's always just been a tough business. There's never been maybe it's just not enough work in that field or something, but I always wanted to get back to product design, product making. It was always what I was interested in. And in that process, so I have kind of Knack and Portland CNC. Knack kind of just sits there. We don't do a lot with it, but we sell some kind of products recurring each year, like the calendar series and minimal things. It kind of got left behind when we started the CNC business because it was just such a better thing at the time. So we started this thing called Knackwall, which was this gridded, kind of glorified pegboard, a better version of a pegboard with more capable fasteners and organization. And Dylan's looking at me. It's behind me right now in my office. And I
pulled it up on my other screen too. I was just looking at it.
Yeah, right. It's still kind of out there. We ended up leaving it for now, for a time being, because I guess like most of my explorations, we stumbled into designing accessories for CNC routers. Specifically, our Shop Saber router needed better dust collection, and that kind of necessitated how the tool changer stands worked. And so we ended up designing a better dust collection boot, the thing that goes on the spindle that collects dust. When you're CNC routing, you create a lot of dust, usually plywood, and it was just pretty bad when we got the machine. So we ended up redesigning both those things, and my audience on Instagram and YouTube were mostly shops like myself or similar. They have the same kind of machines. And so almost immediately we had interest in those products. And so I went from designing this wall system called NackWall and not having an audience for it really to like kind of within a month, it was like, oh, we have a business here out of selling CNC accessories, and just a different, complete difference overnight. It felt like within a month we had totally new thing to go off of. So we've really followed the product thing since then. That was 2022, I believe.
So before we get off Knack, there was two things I wanted to ask you about. One, if I remember right from your podcast, there was some kind of trademark or copyright around the name that you guys were dealing with. Am I remember?
We tried we went after a trademark for Knack in general, if I remember right. I believe so. NackWall? I forget now. It's been a couple of years. And the patent and trademark lawyer, who make a very fine living, let me tell you, they found that, I think the office found that there was something too similar, like those Knack boxes. Have you ever seen these? They're like job boxes that go on like construction sites. They're usually like tan, and they have the word KNAAK or something like that.
Yeah.
They found that those were too similar to what we were considering wall storage in NackWall. And we were like, I guess. And at the time, that was like right around the time that the Dust Boot was starting to take off. And I was just like, this is a long slog here, and I don't have endless money to keep throwing it. There's a lot of money to get them to study and come up with the trademark kind of pieces and see if there's anything else out there. So I don't know. Maybe it was naive to not continue and follow through, but we did not follow through with the trademark on Knack. And that's kind of the...
Okay. So my other question is, how easy or hard was it for you to shift gears? To spend all this time designing things. It's your baby, it's your product, you're proud of it, and then from the outside, it seems like you were like, well, I'm done with that. But like for me, that would be incredibly hard. Like unless I was bored of it, it would be incredibly hard for me to just abandon a project like that.
It took some weeks. Maybe I didn't talk about it publicly. I don't remember at the time, but I had at the time a couple part-time employees and one full-time employee, and we were doing a lot of our job shop work was way more involved at the time. We've scaled that back quite a bit, and so we needed more help. And what was really cool was shifting the people that had never done product design work into product design with the NackWall kind of thing. And so everybody, the passion around making something, I've heard this time and time again. I think Joe maybe spoke about this from Cobra Frameworks, I believe. Just that kind of like passion behind making something of your own is so much different than making stuff for other people. Like you can be passionate about that, but the kind of constant iteration, Austere talked about this too, like making your own things, you just kind of iterate in this different way where there's like, you can constantly make improvements. And that was such a nice progress that it was a pretty easy transition to go from making this theoretical wall system, which had a lot of pieces to it, you needed all these different components to make it work as a selling kit. All the things that go on the wall, not just the wall and the bracket. And it's really good. And we're going to come back to it at some point, I think. I had a lot of interest in it lately again, which is kind of coincidental. But ultimately, being able to make something very specific like a Dust Boot that's kind of always been my story, I think, is when I can really wrap my hands around something specific like that. I think it ends up being a better product, the less intangible, like tangents or octopus tentacles that kind of hang off of it. It gets more refined, and so I think it was easy, especially because it was so successful out the gate. Like there was just immediately people wanting it, and when people want to pay you money for the thing you've been working on, that was the easiest part of it, right? That the money was there, and we were at the end of we were running out of R&D money, let's say, for the NackWall thing. So I always knew we could come back to it. It just was like easy to follow the success. Same with the Portland CNC in the beginning was like, well, I could keep trying to make this desk, or somebody wants to pay me $3,000 for their making these plywood sheets. Like it's just very different.
That makes sense. So let's talk about the dust boot, Baby Pants.
Baby Pants.
I want to hear the whole story of how that came about, because you are like one of the examples I point to when people say like, oh, you can't have a customer facing 3D printed product. It's
right.
it's meant for Etsy if it's a 3D printed product kind of thing. And then I'm like, well, I mean, Justin's selling a ton of these dust boots and they work great. So,
All right. Oh, check this out. Recognize that guy?
Hey, I do. That's awesome.
Early on messaging with Dylan, of our relationship, I think I was saying, hey, I'm having all these troubles printing our dust boot. And Dylan was like, oh, let me try it for you. And he printed me one and sent it like within a couple days. It was super cool. So I still have it. I keep it on the wall behind me because it's a little off flavor. We usually do a red dust boot, and his is a very, very sexy gray.
Yeah. Well, I think it was on the Discord that you were, talking through a bunch of Prusa issues and like layer mismatch. And I was like, hey, I just got this bamboo if you want me to try it. I think it'll be way quicker.
You were my drug dealer in that case. I have 3 of those things now.
Yeah, the first one was free.
Right. Do you get a kickback?
So how did you design it? How did you?
I mean, just as a bit of background, my 3D printing experience was like basically none. We printed some stuff as a little accessory testing. That was where I really got into it for Knackwall. We're making all these little like things we knew would end up being like machined metal, but it was so fast to just print something that had threads in it basically already. You could throw a bolt through it and all of a sudden it was threaded. And so we were testing all these different concepts, very simple, like extruded 2D shapes, nothing with a 3D volume to it really at all, other than just a straight extrusion. And somewhere along the line of like, how are we going to make, we're always kind of talking about, we need to make a better dust boot. It just kind of struck one day. I was like, well, I bet we could just loft, create a different shape that would be better for dust collection. We need to increase the volume. That was the big problem. They're always undersized for what they need in volume, in airflow. I've come to kind of understand you can go from a 4 to a 5-inch duct and it's like a huge increase versus, if you're just shifting 1 inch in anything, it doesn't usually seem like a massive change. But in this case, it was a huge difference. And, I have some experience in CAD modeling, right? So took me probably a couple weeks of really like refining that design in Fusion and printing, and eventually, going from printing it one way to the other to refining it, we now kind of without issue 3D print the port, as we call it, which is where the intake comes from the duct that connects to the plates that connect around the spindle. And all of that kind of assembly turns into what we call the dust boot. They have a lot of different names. People call them skirts. They call them hoods, we hear often. But it's just the thing that goes, the funnel that goes around the spindle on a CNC router that collects dust. I just never thought that a $1,500 printer could print an industrial product. I mean, we were doing it on Prusas that were, $800 or something like that. So kind of wild. We rarely have them break. It's usually because somebody rams it into something or like yanks on it real hard for some reason. So amazing.
Which
still to me.
I imagine is actually kind of a good thing. Like it acts as a mechanical fuse in the case of a crash.
Right. So the one thing that it's hard to understand, maybe most, I would say most of this audience probably isn't people that have run routers, maybe.
Maybe.
Right. It's usually a little bit off to the side. They're incredibly durable. Like, sure, you can crash a mill, but like you can do some nasty things to a router and they just kind of spring back to life again. And usually with no effect. So people do some pretty crazy stuff, crashing into things and ripping. We've had people rip their pedestals right through the table, and it just has no effect on the alignment of the gantry. I'd credit ShopSaver. They have a really good kind of ball screw and ball bearing system that really stays nice and tight. So yeah, they're a little bit different than your average mill. The precision's different too. You're not getting the same thing out of it as you would a nice Speedio, but
well, so how long did you test the dust boot internally before you decided like this is long lasting enough that I can sell this? I think that like any of us normally would be a little hesitant selling a consumer 3D printed product because of that.
I feel like you know too much. We did not test it enough. And the reason that I was immediately clear was we had this improved, we call them ATC pedestals. So if you imagine, instead of like a carousel or a or like an arm that changes your tools in and out, like on a mill, our router, or a lot of them, go over to a spot on the table and change, right? And it's a rack that holds the tools in with a little fork. And we improved that, and we call it an ATC pedestal. And it has cutouts so that the dust boot can more easily change. The standard setup on specifically ShopSavers has a bar so that the brush that goes around it gets smashed when it goes down on top of it. And we very stupidly did not test that. I assumed it would be more durable, the brush. And we found out that a lot of people that had that smashed their brush, and it kind of ruined the dust collection right away. And so that was like the worst. That was one of the most stressful few months of my life, I think, was all these people that were like, I cannot believe this. So your exact point of like, we tested it in terms of quality of dust collection in our setup, but we didn't, for some reason, I just totally missed that idea. So we're a little more cautious about releasing products. I think it took me a long time to release the pedestals because I was really concerned about some of these problems I wasn't foreseeing. So I went out and installed them on customer machines so that I knew the whole process outside of my machine, and a different, newer machine. Worked through beta testers with a couple customers that were really friendly, and they gave me more tips about problems they saw before we really went full release. And so we learned a lot from the first product. Was don't just try it on your own machine.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Any other lessons learned selling a 3D printed product? Different ways of packaging or different ways of approaching costing, things like that, because it's right. For me, at least conceptually, like I sell machine time, I sell, right. Cost plus machine time plus value, whatever. On a 3D printer, so much of that is unattended. And I think you can print 2 of them at once now. Yeah. Like how do you go about costing that in a way that makes you money and also shows the value in the product? I think that like selling a 3D printed product, you can kind of easily fall into that valley of a product is too cheap to seem valuable, if that makes sense.
So it's interesting. I thought there would be pushback. Like you're hitting on a good point. I thought there would be pushback from people that make things that didn't want to see a 3D printed part in a fairly costly product. The baseline for how I got to pricing was the manufacturer had options for dust collection, and they worked, but they were, the one option is $1,000. It's an add-on for the machine. It requires a whole docking sequence. It only works for flat sheet work. So you can't do any 3D machining, really. And kind of always has some issues, the way that it docks and stuff. So that was the baseline for me. It was like, well, we could beat that for sure. I knew I never wanted that because it was adding, so it would add like 20 to 40 seconds to a tool change. And I was just like, it's already slow enough. It takes like 17 seconds now. Especially after getting our YCM that would do like a 3-second tool change. And I was like, this thing is like watching molasses move, So the pricing was easy because the market was kind of built in, and I could easily half that price with a better performance. And I've never tried to sell it as a 3D printed object. I sell it as a solution, right? It's a thing. We've looked into what it would reasonably be even in China to do an injection molded part, and the run cost as well as like the machine, like it's a big mold, like it's just extremely expensive in comparison. And we can print on demand. Like we had a pretty successful last month of selling them, and we fired up more printers, and every 4 hours we have a dust boot part, and it's like, if they break, we can replace them really, really low cost. I think we are under like 5% breakage of all the ones we've ever sold. Like, it's still really low. And so that kind of led us into other products that I didn't think people would take, I guess, other shop owners. And so we have this YCM NXV 560A from, I think, 2015 or 2016. It's a 3-axis mill. Stumbled into a great deal locally, couldn't turn it down. It turned out to be a really great machine. And it was hard for me to understand what was going on inside of it. Like, being a router person where all the tools and stuff are just right out in the open, I was always like, well, what tools where? And the pot numbers didn't line up. And so I designed this little, it's not the first of its kind by any means, but there's others. Saunders and Pearson both have something. It's just a little system that magnetizes to the side. I call it the tool tag tower, that holds a tool tag and then organizes them based on the tool number. And printed those. Those also kind of caught some attention. And so now that's like one of our top selling products, surprisingly, is just this little 3D printed Cat 40 tool tag tower.
So what about pricing that one? Because that's significantly more percentage 3D printed, and there's less comps on the market. So how do you go about pricing something like that?
I mean, maybe it's just experience, I guess. I mean, the minimum you should do in any product pricing is 4 times your cost, right? So that's called keystone markup typically. And so since the pricing, the biggest cost in that product is the magnets. They're very strong, 30 pounds each, I think, something like that, 25 pounds each.
Oh, wow.
And, we don't want them to come off. You don't want to fall off. And it's satisfying. They snap on really nice. But there's still also, just like there is in machining, right? If you have an expertise that nobody can match, for example, not to say that this is the case, but if there's not a lot of competition, right, you can charge more. So I kind of started out at a place, and if they kept selling, we were kind of behind for a while. I was like, well, I guess we could go up a little bit in the price. And we don't change them around a lot, but like, this isn't a thing that people are comparison shopping for. So you can kind of do some A/B testing and see how people show up and either buy it or don't buy it. And so I think those are $60 right now. And I think a lot about, like, person like yourself, what would you mind spending to solve that problem for yourself? What's reasonable? What would I spend? And $60 doesn't seem like that much money for your Harmla, like,
right. Well, exactly.
You're fine with that.
Most things, I would say, under $100 that solve a problem are like a no-brainer purchase at this point. Like the other product of yours that is partially 3D printed is your
tool holder.
Yeah, tool holder holders. Yeah. Yes. And I've got
jokingly
6
named
of them. Like, and it was like, I bought one, or you sent me one. And I was like, this is awesome.
Dylan kindly tested them for us.
Yeah. And I immediately was like, this is amazing.
I tested out another product. I had somebody else try it. See, you got to see that process. I knew Dylan had it. So these racks hold ISO 30, BT 30. Currently, I think we'll have a couple other versions here, but they're racks that are portable that you can put 5 tools in and then carry it from like where you set them up or store them to your machine. For example, if you have like a mill, and we have do we have any of those? No, I think we haven't started selling those yet. We have these little magnet racks that we haven't put out yet. I've been behind on some projects that you can magnetize to the mill or your machine and then put our rack on top of it. But they work for a lot of different kind of, not a lot, but a couple different types of machines at the moment. And we have some others coming down the road too.
Yeah, they're fantastic. And like they do, unless you have your tools right next to your machine, you are carrying holders back and forth and being able to do 5 of them at once. And like I threw a strip of magnetic whiteboard tape on it. And so like I just write like tool 16 and put tool 16 there. And then when I get to the machine, I can just pop it right in. So yeah, stuff like that works really, really well.
Yeah. I mean, so we don't have as many things, I don't think at the moment for, machine shop owners, I guess. But as we have that product, a machine like that ourselves, I'm slowly stumbling into more things I want. And that's kind of always been my reason for making a product is, oh, this sucks. I want a different way to store. Like I was literally staring at some plywood versions of that a past employee had made. And I didn't mind them, but they felt clunky. And I was like, well, this could be a product here, I think. Like what if we just turn this into a sheet metal product that we do 3D print the little insert to go in? And those are wonderful little things that, again, would cost $10,000 to start up, just that portion of it, right? Like just to have that injection mold made to have an insert for one product. So it's just, that costs 5 cents to make one of those on a printer, and we can make 30 at a time, I think 22 at a time on a Bamboo. So I don't know how to say no. I guess the thing that I don't know about all these 3D printed products, which there's a lot of examples out there, I suppose, but how long is there any longevity problems in comparison? And I think as long as you're melting the plastic together right, it should be just as good to the,
I mean, mine
real
have been
thing, I guess,
on and off soaked in coolant for however long since you sent me the first ones, and I haven't had any issues. Also, they're not really taking any of the load. Like the frame itself is all powder coated metal, and that's what's taking all the load. Right.
Yeah. I mean, something like our desk boot takes a lot more strain, and I think the wall on that thing is like 75 thou or something.
It's
the EKG.
Yeah.
It's so ridiculous how much it can take.
When you told me to print it without supports, I was shocked. Like, it is very well designed for 3D printing because it's got like little tabs and stuff. And I was like, this is going to print like shit. Like, what is Justin talking about? And I was like, well, he's printing a few. I'll give it a shot. And like, it worked great.
I was floored when I think you sent me photos and I couldn't tell. And I remember my employee's name is Ricky, and I remember taking it out to him. Him and I had been going back and forth endlessly about trying to figure out better ways to do this stuff. And I just show it to him. He's like, what is that? Where did you get that? That's amazing.
That's hilarious. So you brought up your YCM. I want to get into that story because even a good deal, if it's not something that you can use, is not a good deal. So how'd you find the deal? How did you go about rationalizing buying something only tangentially related to your business? All of that.
Yeah. I mean, it is a similar story, I suppose, to buying our router in that I didn't really have the best business case for it. And it is harder for me to make those purchases now, having a lot more as a business now, like more things going, more people to be responsible for. But Jem and I have talked about this a little bit too. We don't necessarily regret those purchases because like it's almost like the what dreams may come, right? Like it's like what can you build with this machine? And I think some of it's just I always knew that there would be something that would come from buying that mill, and not being a traditional machinist. I would definitely say that getting into the job shop world of metal has not been something that I don't think we're just not going to be that business. I don't have the skills here to be fast at turning around precision parts off a mill. It's not there, but it's been amazing for making our own products where we can spend the time to really make that be a good quality part. And I guess the story is we had a client that we were doing router work for, kind of some crazy 3D machined parts that I can't really talk about, but like they're for one of the major companies in town that makes clothing, and they had this machine that they bought basically for one project to expedite getting some mold work back. Some, like, I've never seen such a thing, a rough mold. It's like almost looks like it's been hewn by like chisels. Not to discredit their quality of machining, but when I was shopping with this, seeing if we were going to buy this thing, I was looking at what they had made with it. And it is a YCM, the NXVs are mold making to some degree, I've come to understand. And it just looked rough, really rough, biggish parts, 14 inches or so, 6 inches deep. And they were doing some testing. It basically used it for 6 months, and then it sat there for 4 years. And it had 260 hours when I came to it. And I think it was about a $70,000 machine originally. And yeah, I got it for a steal. The person that was kind of in charge of that program was just a super good guy. And he's like, we need to move this thing, and I think you could make good use of it. I'll make you a good deal. And it was just way too good of a deal. And there's some, a lot of learning involved with buying a new machine like that. And maybe I thought it would be easier, but I would say that one of the hardest parts is two really hard parts to it is the size of the internal memory is only 512. Really, really struggle with that still. I mean, I've gotten better with it, but still a problem. And then honestly, just not having used anything like Fanuc before, it kicked my butt for so long. It still is a problem for workflow here today. I think Ricky still struggles quite a bit with it. It's just really messy. It's not well designed, at least the way it's implemented in our machine.
Yeah, it's I don't remember what control you have, but it's, very as base FANUC as you can possibly get. It's like an OMD or something.
OIM, if I believe. Either OIM or OAD.
Yeah, something like that. So it's about as base flavor FANUC as you get, which means you don't get any fancy overlays and no productivity help or anything like that.
There is a YCM mode, which honestly is fantastically better. It looks better from a design perspective, but this is the version that we use because the normal kind of running program mode there's just nothing. There's nothing there to look at. So the YCM mode is a little bit better. I had never heard of OYCM before, right? Like I had the kind of thought like, maybe someday we'll buy a Haas or like a, something comparable, having not really like a major reason to have a mill. I never thought, well, we're going to spend $100,000 on a machine. Like, and I honestly pretty happy. We ended up putting Renishaw probing, a tool setter and a probe, spindle probe on it right away, which I just knew from the beginning after watching enough Saunders videos and other things that like, that was going to be the way that it made sense to kind of speed, especially tool setting, just speed up like getting something going, because otherwise the way that they were showing us how to do it, which just, you'll probably appreciate, like, bring it down to the table and roll like a precision dowel back and forth and try to set it. I was like, I'm going to crash this thing doing that. Like, that's just not something I feel comfortable with.
Yes. The good old days. I've definitely set far too many tools that way.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, that gets into one of the questions from the audience. Clear Irons asked, what mill are you looking to upgrade to? So are you looking to upgrade your mill, and what would it be if you did?
Eric listens to our podcast. Nice guy. He was mentioning upgrading. I saw he was selling some of his Haas's, and then eventually bought an Okuma like a week later. And I was like, ooh, you knew what you were going for. I have more fanciful, like I was saying, it's harder for me to make a purchase like that at this point, especially because at this point, I'm very happy to have both machines paid off. And that's really hard now to go without a big, reason. Like the thing I want most is more memory. I want some capability of automation. I listened to your podcast. I listened to Saunders. listen to the Bomb Johns, right? Like, and everybody's talking about automation. I just have this like severe FOMO, honestly, of like, man, we're running everything so manually. Like, this just seems so silly in today's age. And realistically, though, we don't have the need for it yet. But I want something like 4th axis, or, you know, I'd love some kind of 5-axis machine at some day. But it's mostly just like shopping for when we have the need.
Totally, yeah. So actually, you just brought up automation, and one thing that I think that you're known for, especially by listeners of your podcast, is you guys both use ChatGPT and other, you know, LLMs quite a bit. I wanted to ask you for tips and tricks and things that you found useful for using those, because I end up like, I've got a free OpenAI account. I go on there and maybe ask it like 1 or 2 questions that might be actually useful, and then it devolves into like, here's what's in my fridge, what recipes can you make with this, and just like screwing with it. So how have you found it to actually help your business?
Right. I think I use it like Upwork, honestly. I think I've, you know, maybe it's from watching way too many TikToks of people early on that were like, all right, here's how you get the best prompt. And I was interested in those. Now they drive me crazy. But I think that the answer for me is like, I'm pretty forceful with them, and I keep demanding answers, and I'll keep changing the way I ask it. So it's like, you know, if I am working on my Shopify website and I'm trying to redesign a aspect that the product page, and, you know, it's pretty amazing at this point where I can go, well, I'm working on my Shopify website. Here's this code, and you can screenshot that or paste it in. And sometimes the screenshots are super helpful in the sense that like you can put arrows and stuff in them, and it will read the image, read what's in the image, and understand the context between those things much better than if you just tried to type it out. And then, you know, ask it for a solution. And if it won't give it to me, you know, you just kind of keep prodding it in different ways. Or like one thing from long ago that I think still works pretty well is say, all right, I want you to think like a, you know, professional marketer for e-commerce. And something about that, like telling it how to think, really changes the way that it answers you and goes about sorting its little inventory of answers. So, you know, act like a machinist and solve this programming problem. And it's not so good with like CNC things, but yeah, a lot of that kind of like website and product research. And
so what would you say you use it for most? Is it Shopify stuff, or, you know, writing copy for Instagram, or what?
I stay away from the copy because it gets really like emojified and like goofy, and like, you know, I always tell it to stop acting so corporate, because it gives me these like really like professional PR person answers. And I'm like, that's not how I talk. Like, I use it lately. So we come out with a tooling line mostly for CNC routers at the moment. And I was making a tooling SKU system. I think I showed you that too. You gave me some feedback on it. And I was trying to make different formulas, right, to create the way that those work. So I would use GPT to then say, screenshot my spreadsheet. And if you give it enough context and go, I want to make a formula here that takes this set of columns and concatenates it, but also allows me to do options. And, you know, you kind of ask it different things in just simple natural language. And it ends up like coming up with the answer most of the time, which is just, I mean, the spreadsheet thing is kind of maybe the most obvious that I just was surprised by. Like, oh, wow, it really... It would have taken me way longer, and I would be down like some Stack Overflow crappy series of answers that aren't really what I want it to be answering, but I have to interpret it, and stuff like that. That's really been really helpful lately. I actually had it help me generate the entire tooling SKU system, which is way longer currently. I was trying to think of a system that would cover all potential tooling options we may offer. Like, we're going to come out with mill tooling at some point. And currently just have the router tooling, but there's, O flutes, 2 flute up, down, 3 flute drills, all this different stuff. And I would just keep going back and forth with it on my phone. Like, no, I don't really like how that system, let's put a hyphen between the first 2 numbers. And I just did that on my phone for like weeks, just kind of like I'd have a new thought and I'd go back to that thread and just kind of treat it like your employee, I guess, in some regard.
It's crazy how much better it's gotten at remembering threads and continuing them. Like I remember,
right.
Man, it must have been only like 6 months ago. I can't remember what I was trying to get it to do, but I was using it to create episode descriptions for the podcast.
Yep.
And I was giving it rules and having it confirm that it understood rules. And I think I got 5 rules in and then tried to get it to follow the rules to create a description. And it completely lost 3 of the rules right off the bat. And then I would remind it, I'd be like, what are the rules? And it would list all 5. And I'd be like, what rules did you violate? And it was like, none of them. This is perfect. I'm like, you're wrong, clearly.
Yeah, there was some moments where it was, I feel like there was the shock and awe of like how amazing it was to ask a computer to do things for you and mostly get answers. And then we got to this place where it was like, well, that's not really helpful. You're just kind of giving me like gibberish, even though the words are English. And then it's really jumped again in the shock of what it can do, which is nice. I mean, another couple examples I've made, had some ideas for like our Dust Boot has, I made some website calculators or like drop downs. So you could see like, all right, I have this set up. What's the improvement going to be? And it basically wrote the whole back end, I don't remember if it's JavaScript. I don't have to know, right? Because I just asked it. I'm like, I want to put this on my Shopify website. Can you make me this drop down? I want to have these options. Here's what should be in the options. At the end, have it read out the answer. And it just basically within like 5 minutes, I have that solution, right? And I've got a couple of those. We have like an ROI calculator that was generated through GPT as well on that same page. And it's just, selling points for that product. But, it's just a really immensely useful tool. Like Jem keeps poking me and like, can we stop paying for it now? And I'm always like, I don't know, like $20 a month. Like I'm getting so much out of this still.
Right. Well, and it's nice that it keeps your data out of the training data when you're paying for it. I think,
I don't
or at least
know
as
if
a
that's
team.
true. I'm not on the team version. I heard you say that the other to Chris, and I was like, oh, that's interesting to know. But I just try not to put anything that I don't want out there, I guess.
You're not feeding it bank account info and,
no,
all that
not
stuff.
too often. I probably have on accident pasted in one of my passwords or something, but yeah. Okay. How do you, what's your top use for GPT?
Like I said, it has not been much. I've been trying to make a case for it, and for OT or whatever it's called,
right.
Seems like it's closer to something that might actually be useful. Right now, I kind of just play with it, show it off to my parents who are just still in awe at any of this happening. Right. And I think it would have been very useful at my last job because, like, I remember taking a VBA course for Excel for 3 weeks or something like that, so that I could make a spreadsheet for a certain application there. And like I had to learn to write VBA code and spend a lot of time on Stack Overflow troubleshooting. And I likely could have just said, hey, write me this thing that does the, it was very simple stuff. It was like create, buttons that then added all these totals up and gave you the average and, stuff like that. Yeah. So yeah, I can see uses for it. Just currently, I haven't had anything that has been super useful.
I think the best answer, just to answer your original question, is just keep throwing stuff at it and keep being curious about what you. Even if you don't think it can do it, it probably will surprise you. Like, I think my original first was like answering customer service emails, like, oh, my thing, it's always hard to not be emotional in responding to those things of somebody having a problem or like being, just not very nice to you. And so when you can just throw it to the GPT, right, and it just gives you what you should say back, it's always been really helpful for me to like take the answer for me as the business owner, trying to not have an internet moment, like telling these people to go shove it.
Yeah. No, that's a very good use case as well. And I think that it's an important distinction to like continue to use it and continue to understand some of the things it does, but also not get sucked up into like the hype.
Yeah.
Like I was watching all of the reviews of that dumb rabbit thing and just how terrible it was. Like I saw a reel yesterday of somebody putting a Kong dog toy in front of it and saying, "What is this?" And it's like, "It's a tomato." And he's like, "Can I eat it?" And they're like, "No, you can't eat it." And it's like, "What is it again?" And he's like, "It's a tomato." And it's like, "I can't eat a tomato." And they're like, "You can eat a tomato." He's like, "So I can't eat this though?" And they're like, "You can't eat this." And it's like,
unless you're a dog.
Right, cool. All right. Yeah.
Not to go too far off on that, but this guy that does like this YouTube called CoffeeZilla, he kind of finds scams and stuff, and he's basically found that that's a whole scam company.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I watched that whole series. I love CoffeeZilla.
I love that of CoffeeZilla. Usually people just stare at me like, what?
Oh no, I think Pete from Chatter turned me on to him during like the crypto thing.
Oh, right.
Because he was doing so many of those exposés.
Yeah, those were good too.
Yeah, but watching his one just being like, yeah, so this was a NFT scam project, and then they pivoted to Rabbit, and then what do you know? It's another scam project. Like,
right.
So
just trying to get some money from investors.
Yep. So you brought up your tooling line. Pete asked, he wanted to hear about how you approach putting together a tooling line, finding manufacturers, testing, selecting, all of that. I think a lot of us would love to have custom tooling lines, especially people who are product focused like you. You're a reseller for Technics. It makes sense that you do full stack, sell the holders, sell the shrink machines, and now sell the tools.
Right. I mean, I would say that there's definitely, just in that idea, we've had success early on, other than selling our own products, with selling tool holders and collets and stuff like that, because it honestly, it's just, there's a pretty big divide between CNC router shops and like machine shops in terms of like, you kind of get sold a machine and a setup, but you don't. What's amazing about routers is like there's these CAM software packages that make cabinets that, like, you could literally have your machine arrive with all the tools like ready to go, more or less, off a truck, download the software, go through a wizard, never understand the G code. I'm not denigrating any of this. I'm just saying this is just a reality. It's kind of amazing as a turnkey, basically, to everything just works. But then, one of my tool holders is stuck. I can't get it open. I don't know anything. I don't even know what it's called. Like, what is that thing that goes in the spindle, right? Like, you never had to learn because your tradition is, what you came from was making cabinets on a table saw. And so it's just completely different. That's been a lot of my educational content has been targeted towards those kind of people, trying to take them from, I have a machine, but I don't really do much more than make my cabinets on it. I want to do more. How do I do more? And so we started selling tool holders because just simply like understanding what the tool holder metrics are. It's ISO 30, it's ER32, the length. Was confusing for me too.
With Technics, like what made you choose Technics over just reselling a no name China thing from AliExpress?
So we do both. To be completely honest, we have our own tool holders that we work with a Chinese supplier. That took a couple of years to get going, but we were reselling some other tool holders that we were purchasing, and people loved them because some of the manufacturers charge way too much money for that kind of tool holder. And so we were just a good price, and people trust us to kind of source those things. And so I had always bought Technics collets. I really liked them. I think Western had them locally. And I always kind of kept coming back to them because I felt like the price to what you were getting was really good. And so in the idea of trying to sell collets ourselves, for example, I was like, let's try Technics. And it took me a couple weeks of trying to get a hold. It's surprising how hard it is to be a distributor of something, and, kind of talked with them, and over time got approved to be a Technics distributor. And I do like them in general. I think they're They do a lot of their stuff in the States. I think their collets are made in Taiwan, and different places, but just in general, they have a ton of different products. So being able to start from, we have our products, but then like, how do I expand our store without needing to have an immense inventory or purchase needs like that? That felt like it was a really good way to go, because we can get everything from shrink fit machines to shrink fit tool holders to, they just have, I think it's like 6,000 items in their list. So
is shrink fit
answer your question?
Fairly popular with routers?
No, not really. And I don't know that it would be necessarily, but I started to get inquiries for people that knew, and kind of like internet, like organic SEO stuff, maybe before Google really shifted its the whole Google Zero thing. But I just, threw those on the website, and we get quite a few inquiries. I've sold a couple shrink fit machines, because Technics does make a really nice, affordable shrink fit machine. And they do make it in the States, which is interesting, and has a good warranty. So
that's super interesting. So then, let's jump over to the tooling itself. How did you go about finding a supplier, testing, selecting, all that stuff?
That was on my mind, because we were kind of working our way down the spindle, right? We got our dust boot, we've got tool holders, collets, and tooling was always like something that I'm always looking for a way to improve the experience for our customers, right? And I think it's something you guys talk about here on with Intolerance, and everybody talks about. It's just the industry is really behind in terms of the experience of buying things. And tooling is pretty notoriously rough, except for a few examples. A lot of distributors and just confusing situations. So I was like, well, tooling might make sense. And then we actually just had a vendor reach out from the States, and I knew of some of the stuff they had made previously, and they sent us some tools to test. We had some before. And so we do not obviously make we don't grind our own carbide. So we tested some of those. What was cool is they were willing to make versions that were to our own specification. So in some of the situations, like I wanted shorter versions of a 1/2-inch end mill that nobody really made. So like we're able to make our own specifications with like no crazy markup, which if you've ever had custom carbide made, it's hundreds of dollars usually per part, per piece. And fair enough, like I don't blame those companies, but it's nice to be able to kind of do some testing and not have to pay a fortune for it. So it was a known quantity before we started selling it, I guess. So we didn't have to I wasn't unsure that they would be good quality. That makes sense?
Yeah, no, that's cool though that they're made in the US too. I mean, I would imagine that that's a pretty great selling point for you as well.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the carbide comes from, I believe, Germany and Japan, but yeah, ground in America, and super great company to work with. And it's pretty new. I think we just launched it last month, and I'm still working on my commitments of having like good tooling libraries and feeds and speeds. I wanted to get it out there and see what some people thought. And so far I've had good results, and kind of keep expanding. We have only about, I think, a dozen tools at the moment, but kind of the bread and butter tools for CNC routers, and somewhere soon getting into some mill tooling. But yeah, it's been an interesting experience. Got lucky, I think, that we had others. I've had Chinese tooling suppliers for 5 years DMing me, offering their services. And not to say that I would never go that way, but it is really nice to just have somebody so close. Having worked with Chinese suppliers to make our tool holders, for example, like there's just such a difference in, just somebody speaking your own Like we're both first language English speakers. We're both close. We're in the same time zone. Like it's just different. It's just fast to get something accomplished versus thousands of miles away.
Right. Oh yeah, exactly. And the last thing you want to do is, I've heard quite a few stories of, and not just tooling, but kind of bait and switch, where like the prototypes and the samples are fantastic. And then you're like, cool, let's order 500 of them. And they come in and they're just terrible, So that's most likely not going to happen to you with someone who's relatively local. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's been a good experience. And there's just, there's a lot of variation that you can have too in how you use router tooling, right? Like they're really high RPM compared to mills. It's 18, 22,000 RPMs. I think our spindle goes to 24. I don't really go that high, but low torque. So you need a lot of speed, both in RPM and movement, because you get a lot of heat generated in something like a compression tool. So there's a lot of things that we can provide value, I believe, to our customers when that experience I'm saying is like fairly common, I think, where you buy a machine to speed up your cabinet making, for example, and potentially are burning up carbide because you're running too slow, for example.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can't imagine the mind shift it is to go to wood compared to cutting metal. Like I'm used to like, oh, this is where heat builds up in metal, and this is how you deal with it. But like it's an entirely different thing cutting something so abrasive.
Right. What's interesting is my experiences. This is going to sound crazy, but I think that tooling wears out faster in plywood than it does aluminum.
Which is insane.
It's crazy. I mean, like, I'll give you the example that's kind of crazy about plywood. So if you have a sheet of Baltic birch, 3/4 inch, 4x8, it's kind of the bread and butter of a lot of plywood routing. It's about 13 pounds of wood, and of the 88 pounds, the rest is glue.
What?
So you're mostly just cutting through glue, which is why people are concerned about like formaldehyde in plywoods, why that's a big deal. Like Apple Ply is such a Kleenex brand of plywood, for example, and it's made here in Oregon, and they're all soy glues. So yeah, people want that kind of stuff in their houses now. And anyway, I won't go too far into the plywood world, bore everybody here.
No, that's super interesting though. And it makes sense to have it in your home, but I had never thought about like the people making the stuff too. Like that's a significant difference in work life quality, being around aerosolizing a soy glue versus like formaldehyde based stuff. Like,
right. And the industry has pushed back pretty hard against that kind of stuff. So it's usually all pretty low formaldehyde. But I mean, like, it's on our website for the dust boot, but like there is a legit reason to have good dust collection. And it is not aerosolizing glues. It's not like, if you don't catch it at the source, just like any type of dust or mist, it's in the air. And then it's way harder to deal with it after it's up in the air. So that was always a huge impetus for us trying to improve things, was we were just pretty fastidious about dust collection and capturing it otherwise. And then our main machine was throwing it out the sides of underneath its, dust boot brush that wasn't adequate. So, it's been a pretty big change. Just the amount you find on like surfaces is way down, which is cool.
Yeah. I watched your, Autodesk tour the other day.
Oh yeah.
And I was not shocked. Like I kind of assumed that you would have a fairly clean shop, but like for a wood shop, it was extremely clean. And I'm sure you cleaned for them, but regardless,
we did. Yeah.
It was impressive.
Ricky is right outside the door here, but he's, I am pretty organized and I want things to be clean, but he is like another level of like, he keeps things very clean. And we do have this goofy thing. I can't totally recommend it for machine shops, but I have heard a few people have appreciated it. I made a video on, we have a little shop Roomba, and that thing does such a good job. It's lasted maybe a year and a half, is $300, and it goes and dumps itself. But the example I can give you, if you've ever played on like a basketball court and it's kind of dusty and then they sweep it, it feels like that after it runs. It's like a little layer of dust versus like, now my shoes squeak, and it's not that great of a machine either. But that thing has been a huge quality of life improvement for us for how little it cost.
Which one is it, and does it require Wi-Fi? Because like I've wanted a shop Roomba for a while, but I don't want any of those new ones that like map your floors and all. It's like, I don't need this super
I don't
intelligent.
Think you have to. That's a good question. It does have a Wi-Fi mode, but I don't know that it's necessary because you can just push the button on it. You might not be able to schedule it as well or something like that.
Okay.
Like have it run every day. It runs every morning. It does map the floor, but honestly, that's a weird benefit because like then I can have it go clean only around the router or something. I don't know. So if you don't want that, it may be a killer. But I have had crappier ones, both home and in my office, that when they have no quote unquote intelligence, they're basically just a dumb thing bumping into stuff and they get stuck. And
it's a
just
tough
not as good
balance to strike for sure.
Right.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
Let's see. Rudolph Diesel Service asked, would you buy a different router if you did this over again? And does that router have ball screws? What kind of accuracy are you seeing in your router versus one you might want to get? All that stuff.
Right. I mean, I wish, my joke is always, I wish I was paid by ShopSaber to sell their machines, but I've sold a lot of them. But I'm not. I am very happy with it. Like one of the weirdest things to explain, especially to someone like yourself, is, have you ever heard of a machine having lifetime technical support for free?
No. Definitely not.
Pretty wild that the first owner gets lifetime technical support, and they kind of go out of their way to give you every capability to repair the machine yourself. Like they almost like don't want to be paid to come help you fix it. They would rather work through and help you fix it yourself, which is like complete credit to them. And they do make a really good machine. Like it is, I bought this machine at the AWFS show, which I could not tell you exactly what that's. It's like some woodworking fine, I don't remember what it is, but it was in Vegas, which was weird, in 2017. And I was just going around. I'd done some research ahead, but I would go over to like the Freedom Machine and there's one called New CNC, which is a great name. Techno Router, all these different machines. And I would just kind of like compare, and I knew I was going to do 3D machining. I knew I wanted larger than a sheet of plywood, which is typically 48 inches, because the desk I was making was 60 inches or 59 inches. And then I was really impressed by that they had all ball screws. Honestly, everybody else was rack and pinion, and they would talk about their compensation for that in software. And I just kept thinking, there's no way that's going to work as well. And the price was good. I spent $40,000 on that Pro 408 ShopSaber router in 2017, and nothing compared to that. I think their prices are still pretty good. So we've had zero major problems with it. Like it had some weird gremlins with electrical for a while, which is maybe one of their kind of constant things, that there's some like overheating when it was doing certain Y-axis moves repeatedly. But other than that, like the thing has been rock solid. Like I crashed a piece of plywood into my garage wall against one of the gantry arms. It scratched the paint, but never seen a problem with it. So super happy with it still. Yeah.
That's killer. What kind of software do they run on?
It's called WinCNC.
Okay.
It's kind of like Winamp skinned for ShopSaber. It's easy, very easy to run. It doesn't have a lot of options. And it's been interesting, some of the things that I appreciate now, both ways, in Fanuc versus WinCNC. Like, there's for one thing, you can when a program is running, you can't do anything else with the software. Like you can't go view another page or something. Stuff like that. That's just like kind of baseline. That's nice about, you know, a higher end controller, but it's a PC based controller. So it's just pretty simple. Like we can Dropbox all of our posts onto that Windows computer and then run them from there really easily. When I was first starting up, I had like Fusion and like probably Rhino on it too, which was kind of stupid, and was working on it in my garage, and I would kind of do all the things in the same computer. And then I was finally like, I probably shouldn't do that anymore. Let's just stick to just running WinCNC on there.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear that it's been a lasting purchase. It seems from the outside, at least, that like the router market has a lot of garbage in it. At least looking in, it seems like there's a lot of just like kind of low cost entry points that are, you know, they might last you a couple years of being a hobbyist, but definitely not stand up to a business.
I'd say there's definitely the same thing happening. There was always, I'd say, more than what's happening currently with like the DC-1 and the sills and all that kind of stuff. It's had easy to buy Chinese routers. And I mean, even like when I was moving to Portland, there was a guy that was always posting Chinese routers on Craigslist. And I was like fascinated by that at first. And when I was living in Seattle, I was like, oh my God, there's these cheap routers that are new. And the more I looked into it, I was like, I don't want that. You know, like the thing that I learned from my experience in school with the crappy Pre-6 was the school couldn't pay anybody to come fix that thing. Like we could not find somebody that wanted to work on it. And that was such a selling point of like constantly battling that problem versus how nice it is that as long as I can call them during central time hours, ShopSaver picks up, somebody answers. You know, you used to be this guy named Ben, and Ben would always give me an answer like straight away. And that was such a difference. And a lot of it was like educational at the time, right? Like, and we try to share a lot of what we've learned. Kind of, we have like a public help desk for ourselves, but then I started sharing our ShopSaver things because I would just kind of get similar questions all the time. But there is a lot of that, right? There's a lot of a new kind of more branded Chinese machine coming to the market, and they are a lot cheaper. I can't speak to whether they're good. There's some companies that are standing behind them and like seemingly having service, kind of like a Sill situation with Titan. So it's good for the market, I think, in terms of it knocks down those potentially higher priced machines that don't need to be potentially. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, competition's almost always good.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that brings us on to shop news and new things. You've already mentioned your tooling line, but anything else that's new or exciting in your world?
New or exciting? Let's see. Surprise question.
Yeah, I never asked this one.
I mean, one of the things we're working on, I'm trying to bring more fixturing options to routers. There's a lot of it ends up being vacuum that's flow. It's kind of high volume, low pressure. And a lot of routers don't have good mechanical fixturing options. And so I'm trying to it's been a nice experience of learning about mills and all the kind of traditional ways to hold parts and things. And I want to bring some of our own versions of those things to the router market. So that's, without saying specifics, like that's my goal this year, is to kind of get into that offering. And I think it's going to be pretty nice for people that want to do that kind of thing too.
How much of router work holding is just screwing the sheet to the bed?
Definitely I'd say like the hobby machines or the machines that don't have vacuum, which like the table is usually on a router that's industrial or like a professional level. Like what we have, they have a it's just a V groove, like a V groove cutter. And then there's different ports, and the vacuum flows through underneath the bed and sucks through MDF and pulls down your sheet of whatever you're cutting, which is kind of blows everybody's mind, me included, when I first saw it, that you can just pull right through MDF sheets, which is your sacrificial spoil board. And that's kind of, I always call it the magic work holding, because for the most part, that's what everybody uses. You just do that. But there are people that don't have the vacuum, or if you don't have enough, you do end up screwing it to the sacrificial sheet. Yeah, there's surprisingly a lot of machines don't really come with like they don't have T-slot tables. They don't have tap tables. There's no fixturing options. It's just a big flat slab and only vacuum. So yeah, trying to come up with some kind of solution for that works on a lot of different machines.
Awesome. I look forward to seeing that. All right. Well, then that brings me to the last 3 questions I ask every guest every week. First up, what did you research this week? Doesn't have to be manufacturing related, just what's been popping up in your browser.
Right. Trying to think what's been new. I've been trying to change. This is kind of a weird answer, I suppose, but I've been making YouTube videos since 2018 or something like that. And they've kind of always been the same style, same thing. And being 36 now, it seems that my style isn't hitting the algorithms the same. I feel like I'm not getting the same results as I used to. So I've been pushing myself, which has been way harder than I expected, to make a new, more contemporary style of video. And I guess it would be more towards like a Gen Z style, where it's like more personable and less polished, I guess. I don't know how to describe it. I barely can wrap my head around it. So it's not really a research. It's more like this is what I've been spending a few days now working on a video about machining plywood, which I've never done before for some reason. And it's been kind of melting my brain a little bit. Just even editing the video, I'm like throwing in some normal elements and I'm like, oh no, that doesn't really work in this new idea. I don't know. It's just...
So like what kind of examples are you seeing make a good video now? Because like from what you just said, it sounds like the worse it is, the better it is. Now again, are we back around the
lo-fi is it? You know, have you seen the people with the little microphone that they hold up? I'm not doing that. I'm not going full. I can't do some of those things. Like I spent too many years trying to like become good at audio and video to like just throw it all away. I feel like, not that I'm like an expert, but I think speeding up the editing so it's less, there's more, I call it like Mr. Beastifying it, right? Like there's more happening, less like me in front of a computer talking about Fusion, which has kind of always been my thing. I think it's like a little too slow where we lose interest. And I've always had a hard time trying to make it more like, you know, if you want to succeed in doing anything on YouTube, I feel like you've got to hit a larger market than like the 16 people that want to learn about CNC router something that I tend to do. So trying to make it a little more widely appealing, which I don't know if that's going to work out or not. I don't know. It's kind of an experiment, this video. So we'll see.
All right. Yeah, I'm definitely curious to hear what comes of it. It's crazy to me, some of the things people have to do to get watches on their videos now. Like it's I can definitely empathize with what you said of like, it would like a lot of that stuff would make me uncomfortable to do, where it's just like, I won't do this.
Yeah, me too. Like, I'm never going to do a prank video. Like it's not, I'm not changing, I guess, who we are. I'm trying to change the presentation or the pacing or like the way that things go on the screen, instead of, I think I used a lot of like, I don't know, more like, the only way I can describe it is like a more polished thing instead of it being a little more off the cuff feeling, which is hard to do because that's also contrived, right? Like that's intentional as well. Right. For a lot of those videos. So
yeah, they're not actually off the cuff.
Right. Yeah. It's very planned.
All right,
I don't know.
cool.
Maybe I'm just crazy.
No, I think that, if you want to continue to do something, you have to change with the times. It's unfortunate, but true.
Right. Yeah. I will say that I have made a goal to myself to hopefully keep up with those things. So, understanding technology in different ways. Jem and I talk a lot about fusion, but like, I've had the thought like someday fusion may not be the thing, even though I'm like real sunk in. There's a lot of sunk cost around that, and it's hard to imagine right now, but like shifting away into something else that may cost more, like, whew, that's an interesting feeling.
I've had those dirty thoughts a few times recently as well, mainly when I'm struggling with a bug or something. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to spend a lot of money on something stupid.
I'm going to solve this problem.
Yeah.
But what have you been researching?
I have to look at my phone. I don't know that I have been researching all that much. A lot of it has just been like trying to survive the insane amount of work we have right now. I guess I've been looking more at ball bars. I posted on my Instagram.
Oh,
we bought a used ball bar kit and then bought the upgrade kit to the QC20 from Renishaw, which is their, newest. And I put newest in quotes because it's probably from the early 2000s based on the documentation on it. But we really want to start ball barring all our machines every 6 months and having, that kind of data on hand so we can track the health of the machine and make sure that basically I see my role in the company large in part of just like finding all of the potential things that could go wrong. And then how do I make sure that they don't go wrong?
Yeah.
And so like, as there's only 2 of us and we've got more machines now, but we only have 4 machines. It's like, if I can keep on top of that and start seeing a degradation in accuracy or repeatability early enough, I can potentially fix things before they become like a real issue or we ship a bad part or something like that.
These seem like pricey little devices.
Yeah, they're accurate or they read out to 5 or 6 decimal places metric, I think. So you're talking microns like that. It's
amazing
checking out at. So, we'll see. I'm very excited. I've really wanted one. They ball barred the F600 when we had issues with the Y-axis linear guides last year. And it was kind of a struggle to get them to do it. They were like, oh, we don't have these kind of problems with Speedios. And I'm like, that's cool and all, but like we are.
Somebody does.
And we should probably check this thing because it's a very easy and quick test. And after that, I was like, all right, so we need to buy a ball bar at some point. And a good priced one, QC10, which is the older wired one, came up on eBay. I just had like an alert. Used? Yeah. I had a standing alert for him on eBay. And when it popped up, I was like, all right, I'll shoot him a lower offer and see what he says. And he countered. And I was like, yeah, that'll do it.
That's an interesting, I would have a lot of trouble trusting the quality of that. How did you know that was going to be a good quality item off eBay? That's such an important piece of measuring.
So the reason I wasn't all that worried is that the upgrade kit from Renishaw is still $5,000 or something like that. And it's $5,000 because you're trading in the main parts of the system. So once I get this new one in, I have to send back the QC10 transceiver, which is like the body and encoder and all that stuff. So basically like it could have been 100% trash and I still would have been fine. It turns out that I bought it from a retired independent machine tool repair tech. And so like he called me after he shipped it and was like, hey, here's your tracking number. Just by the way, you're getting a lot more than you think you bought. We got all these extra parts in there and it was just calibrated in 2020 and blah, blah, blah. And like I had all the magnets replaced in the master gauge in 2020 when it was recalibrated. And I was like, oh, awesome. All right. Even better.
I see. Yeah. That's a good situation.
Yeah. So that's what I've been researching this week. All right. Second question. What are the things you're working on to be a better person, leader, employer, what have you? None of us are perfect. We're all working on stuff.
Yeah. I'd say that I became a dad in November for the first time. And that's been something we were hoping for a long time. So it's exciting. But it has been interesting. You can only do so much parenting, let's say, with an infant. But what's been interesting is how it's affected my work too. I've been much more short, and that kind of came up actually at, here at the shop, that I've been a little more tense and short. And so I've been working on that whole thing that you hear about. It's almost like the reverse, where like you hear about like, you get home after work and you got to sit in the car and like change your mindset. And they're like, I actually have to do it both ways now, where I'm like frustrated by traffic and I get here and I don't want to be a jerk, but I just kind of like end up being underslept and short. And so it's just been a mindfulness challenge, I guess, for me to try to like not, be a good person both places.
Totally. Have you found anything that helps that exceptionally? Because I know that, even without kids, I definitely struggle with that from time to time, where like I might be overstressed about a certain few things and let that bleed into all of my interactions for the day.
Yeah, no, I think I still suck at it, but I've been a long believer of just, it sounds really goofy, but like just thinking about what you want to accomplish, I guess, which is like, I'm going to be like, when you see the person you're maybe having struggles with, like ahead of time, like visualize how you're going to communicate with them. And that tends to work much better. I mean, the other weird thing that I probably should start doing that worked really well for me is to, in a very simple sense, like journal and write every day. Was one thing I did was I would write every day and like write the things that I'm thankful for or appreciate. And that will change your mind more than anything. Like it's such a simple, basic thing. And literally, if you just write down 3 things like that, and it could be the same thing. Like for a long time, it was just my wife, my dog, that I have a roof, and something about that will really change your mindset. So, I mean, it's also hard to, I guess, be a jerk. The baby is such a huge change in terms of like, let's just say morale at home. Like he's just such a happy thing to be around. So that's been really nice.
Awesome. All right. Last up, what's a win or two from this week that you want to share?
I don't have anything good, man. Let's see.
A win or a lesson. I'll say that.
A lesson. Win or a lesson. I ended up making, except for I just covered you up. One thing I've wanted to do for quite a while is to make a Venn diagram of the job shop work that I want to do and that we should be doing, especially because we've been focusing more and more on what's our we've known for a long time our core competency of like what we're good at, but the Venn diagram in particular is, what's profitable, is it easy work, and is it ideal work? And like, I'll share it with you after this, but I finally made it and it took me maybe half an hour, but I'm kind of always trying to remember, like, what should I be? I get these RFQs and I can't turn off my brain from trying to accomplish them sometimes, where I'm like, oh no, I gotta do all the jobs because we need the money. And it's just like an old mentality of like scarcity. And realistically, we're a product business that does some job shop work. And so I'm pretty happy with that at this point. It's helped me a couple RFQs already to basically say, nope, that does not fit in enough of those circles,
That's great. Yeah. You were talking about that, I think, on your 100th episode.
Yeah.
And glad to hear you actually did it, because I heard that and I was like, oh, I know what I'm good at. Like, I don't need to do that. And then I was like, that actually sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah, it's a little silly, but I do find those like visual things to stare at when I get too far down a rabbit hole of like, I think I could accomplish that project. And then I get to the end, I'm like, well, their budget's way lower than it needs to be. And, they didn't give me very good files. And really, that's just like, it should just be an easy no. And it's so much harder to just say no to things than trying to figure them out, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and visual cues, even when you know better, are still very important. Like I know Chris and I, the last episode we released, I texted him during the edit and I was like, we said like so many times.
Oh my God.
And he was
I'm
like,
sure I did.
And he responded, he said, oh yeah, we need to bring back the slow down sign, because for a couple episodes he just wrote like a little card and stuck it to the back of his microphone so that we could both see it, that said slow down. And it was just that visual cue of every time I look back over it, I'm like, all right, slow down. You don't need to.
He just wrote it on his forehead.
He's going to get it tattooed.
Oh.
Yeah. But it's visual cues like that even when you know better and even when it should be habit are still super important. So I think that Venn diagram sounds like a great idea.
Right. I have one quick question for you.
Of course.
Have you ever thought about making a product?
Yes. Actually,
you don't have to say what.
I reopened a product or project idea. I don't know if it'll be something that I'd ever want to sell because it's fairly complex, but I was looking for example parts that I could share with a friend that I had designed. And so I was going through my personal folder on Fusion and found an old project and actually reached out to a friend to potentially help me with it. I think I'm going to finally make at least one.
Cool.
And see how I like it. I don't want to share too much about it in case I do end up wanting to sell it. It's like a totally superfluous item. Nobody should buy it, but also I think it's going to look really cool. So we'll see. I'm excited to have a project outside of work that is not just programming customer parts.
Right. Yeah, no kidding. It's a drug, man. It's very addicting.
It's incredibly tough. And the last few months have been very good for the business and very taxing on me mentally. So I'm looking forward to having somewhat of a break doing that stuff.
No kidding. Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, please plug all your socials and website and everything before we take off.
Sure. We are Portland CNC or PDX CNC. I believe the handle like at PDX CNC on like Instagram. I believe on YouTube as well. TikTok, if you're there. Not really a main place for our demographic. I try mostly just consume content there. And then we have a podcast called Parts Department. It's not an auto show for a dealership, which is sometimes crossed over with, but if you see an Australian gentleman and myself, Jem and Justin, that's us. Yeah, usually about our businesses and CNC things and software we use and problems we're facing. So, yeah, it's a very enjoyable podcast. I highly recommend it. You guys do a good job with the editing and the sound bites and all of that stuff. Yeah, exactly. That's what makes it so much fun, though, for sure. Yeah, that's good.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, Justin, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you coming on. I'm glad we can make it work.
Yeah, thanks so much. I've listened forever. It's a pleasure and honor to be on this show, and I hope you all enjoyed listening to this chat.
Awesome. Well, thank you, and thanks to all the Patreon members who make the show possible. Thank you all for listening, and I will be back next week.
Thanks to Dylan for letting us repost the episode here. Go subscribe to With Intolerance. There's a link in the show notes. Hoorah!